The number of creative decisions that go into making a single successful movie is absolutely mind-boggling. It generally takes a village to make a great or even good film. And while no movie is beyond surprising us all when it finally comes out, sometimes there's an early sign that it's doing things right. I'm Ellie for Whatculture, and let's take a look at these upcoming movies that just made incredibly smart decisions. Starting with a street-level sequel, Spider-Man Brand New Day. Much as the Marvel Cinematic Universe's multiverse saga has been a ripe vehicle for oodles of fan service, it's also fair to say that the concept risks running itself into the ground if it continues unabated. And so it is a relief to hear from MCU producer Kevin Feige himself that the franchise's fourth Spider-Man film, the now shooting Spider-Man Brand New Day, which, fun fact, has just been filming in my hometown in the last month, will be focused at the street level with less of an emphasis on huge-scale, world-ending events. This tracks given that we know Brand New Day will feature appearances from Daredevil, Kingpin, and the Punisher, who are typically much better suited for grittier, comparatively grounded stories. After the unrestrained fan service of Spider-Man No Way Home, bringing the story back down to earth for the next film seems like the right creative call. This will also allow it to serve as a much-needed palate cleanser between the more out-there shenanigans of the Fantastic Four First Steps and Avengers Doomsday. Casting an unknown actor, Bond 26. Ever since Daniel Craig wrapped up his James Bond tenure with 2021's No Time to Die, speculation has run rampant about who will succeed him in the role of the iconic spy. Just a few of the bookies' favourites in recent years have included Aaron Taylor-Johnson, Theo James, Harris Dickinson, and Callum Turner, though a recent report indicates that Studio Amazon and director Denis Villeneuve have opted to go in another direction. If the scuttlebutt can be believed, the filmmaker will be foregoing established names in favour of an unknown actor to portray a younger iteration of Bond in his late 20s or early 30s. Now obviously unknown is a relative term, but it certainly indicates that Villeneuve will be casting a wide net for the role, looking beyond rising film actors and likely considering those still cutting their teeth in TV and theatre. Now given that just about any name actor will bring a certain amount of baggage to a role as statuesque as Bond, discovering a talented off-the-radar performer is infinitely more exciting and interesting. Cutting the budget, keeping it simple, Fast 11. The most recent Fast and Furious movie, Fast X, was basically all of the series' worst instincts dialed up to 11, with a scrawled-on-a-napkin script and wildly overstuffed cast undercutting set pieces that began to feel disappointingly ordinary. It was also a ridiculously expensive monument to Hollywood excess, with an eye-wateringly massive budget of $340 million, ensuring it didn't stand a chance of turning a profit theatrically. However, Fast X's commercial underperformance, being the lowest grossing since 2011's franchise-rejuvenating Fast 5, has reportedly prompted something of a pivot for the series' apparently final mainline entry, Fast 11. Now, according to the Wall Street Journal, Universal won't greenlight the sequel until it can be produced for a budget of no more than $200 million. That's a whole $140 million less than the last film. And honestly, some belt-tightening and fat-trimming for a franchise that's become a bloated, unwieldy shadow of its former self is no bad thing. Given that Vin Diesel has already claimed that Fast 11 will be a more grounded film centered around street racing in Los Angeles, it should absolutely be possible to deliver that for $200 million or less. For a franchise whose origins seem almost hilariously quaint by today's standards, returning to something more straightforward for its big farewell does seem totally apt. Confirming Cillian Murphy's cameo 28 years later, The Bone Temple. Though some were disappointed not to see original franchise lead Cillian Murphy make an appearance in the recent 28 Years Later, director Danny Boyle did confirm during the sequel's press tour that Murphy will 100% show up in the next film, 28 Years Later, The Bone Temple. But in a laudably pro-audience move, Boyle also went on to reveal that Murphy will only appear in a brief cameo in The Bone Temple, teeing up a more substantial lead role in a prospective follow-up that will only be made if if the Bone Temple succeeds at the box office. Now, while Sony likely weren't happy that Boyle spilled the beans on the size of Murphy's role up front, it's also smart to set the right expectations before a film's release. In this case, ensuring that audiences are aware they won't be getting a lot of Murphy in the next movie. Whether this approach will have an impact on the film's box office remains to be seen, but 28 years later certainly didn't hurt commercially for Murphy's absence. A $40 million budget, Clayface. One of the riskier projects in James Gunn's DC universe is Clayface, a body horror film centered around the famed antagonist from Batman's Rogues Gallery. Though Clayface is certainly a well-known Batman foe, he's hardly the safest choice for his own movie, especially with the tendency for most modern superhero movies to be inherently high-budget, high-risk productions. But in a surprising move, Clayface will actually only cost $40 million, a practically paltry price tag compared to, say, the $225 million recently spent on Gunn's Superman. Now, this likely speaks to the film being helmed by a lesser-known filmmaker, Speak No Evil's James Watkins, rather than genre royalty, with an on-the-rise ensemble cast who aren't commanding massive paychecks. But above all else, it suggests that we're not going to see much of Clayface in his clay form, which would require extensive, costly VFX work. Now, given that Clayface is a shapeshifter capable of assuming anyone's form, he'll presumably just hop from disguise to disguise throughout the film with only some intermittent clay morphing effects to sell each transformation. Considering the movie will need to work hard to win over the disinterested casual mainstream, keeping the budget low is definitely a canny choice right out of the gate. Getting Anna Faris and Regina Hall back, Scary Movie 6. For more than a decade, it truly seemed like the Scary Movie franchise was deader than disco. After 2013, Scary Movie 5 was near universally panned by critics and grossed less than half of the previous film. Even though the spoof genre seemingly died a death in the 2010s as high-quality parodies could be freely disseminated by content creators on social media, last year it was unexpectedly announced that Scary Movie 6 was in development. Now, while it was a relief to hear that the Wayans brothers were back on board as writers and producers, the real coup here was in securing the services of original stars Anna Faris and Regina Hall, who conspicuously sat out Scary Movie 5. Whether Scary Movie can prove itself relevant in the 2020s remains to be seen, but even if the rest of the movie is a mess, which is a distinct possibility, it'll at least be a delight to see Faris and Hall reprising the roles of Cindy and Brenda for the first time in 20 years. Revealing the accents early, the Odyssey. Audiences who went to see Jurassic World Rebirth in cinemas back in July were treated to a teaser trailer for Christopher Nolan's new fantasy epic, The Odyssey, focused on a tense conversation between Tom Holland's Telemachus and a currently unconfirmed character played by Jon Bernthal. As gorgeous as the footage looked, some took umbrage with the fact that Holland and Bernthal both used American accents to portray ancient Greek characters, complaining that it came across as anachronistic. Many expected them to either adopt broad English accents, basically cinematic shorthand for historical epics, or even try their hand at some version of a Greek twang. But ultimately, what audiences expect and what's actually historically accurate are two different things. And more to the point, The Odyssey is an adaptation of an epic fantasy text, so who really cares? This was obviously an artistic choice on Nolan's part, and he was incredibly smart to drop a dialogue-filled teaser trailer a full year before release, allowing everyone to get the tired accent discourse out of their system long before the movie comes out. Going meta, Anaconda. Many eyebrows were raised in 2020 when it was announced that Columbia Pictures were developing a reboot of the schlocky 1997 monster movie Anaconda. As commercially successful as the original film was, there simply wasn't much desire to see the IP dusted off for another go-around. And even when Paul Rudd and Jack Black were confirmed to star in this comedy horror reimagining, it was tough not to think, who asked for this? But then the first trailer for Anaconda dropped, and it all started to make sense. The big hook here is that this new film is basically a meta-legacy sequel, with Black and Rudd playing friends who enter the Amazon rainforest in order to remake their favourite childhood movie, Anaconda. Things get complicated when a real ancient oversized snake shows up and starts eating everyone, with a wink-wink vibe that's undeniably shades of Tropic Thunder. Now, there's still no guarantee that this one sings, but given that it's being co-written and directed by Tom Gormican, it's entirely possible this gives the mouldy IP a riotous, unexpected shot to the heart. Getting it made fast, Man of Tomorrow. As co-chairman and co-CEO of DC Studios, James Gunn is one hell of a busy guy. So it would have surprised absolutely nobody if a sequel to his recent Superman reboot took 3, 4, even 5 years to hit screens. But Gunn has rather shrewdly decided to make the follow-up, Man of Tomorrow, his top priority. Gunn confirmed that he was writing the sequel before the first film was even released, and then completed his first draft back in September. Around this time, Gunn went one further and announced the sequel's release date for July 9th, 2027, with shooting scheduled to begin next April. In an era where even slam dunk sequels can take years and years to get made, this is incredibly smart. Superman performed well critically and commercially, and so striking while the iron is hot is absolutely paramount, both to cement this new iteration of the Man of Steel in pop culture and further build momentum for the burgeoning DC universe. Bringing James Wan back, Saw 11. James Wan was the director of the original Saw, and also helped conceive the story with writer Lee Whannell. And though he subsequently collaborated on the story for Saw 3, that's more or less where his creative contributions to the series ended. Wan has received an executive producer credit on the 7 subsequent sequels, effectively meaning that he gets paid for each new film by being the co-creator of the IP. But after Blumhouse acquired a stake in the franchise earlier this year, it was announced that Wan would be creatively involved with the upcoming 11th film, with co-producer Jason Blum affirming a desire to return the series to the people who built it in the first place. Wan himself has expressed a desire to do right by long-time fans while opening Saw up to a new audience. And given Wan's track record in horror, it's exciting to see him actively working in the franchise that made him a household name. If anyone can revitalize Saw moving forward, it's him. The incredible casting, The Hunger Games, Sunrise on the Reaping. Casting is one of the most underappreciated filmmaking disciplines, so it's fitting that the Academy will be giving out a Best Casting Oscar from next year's ceremony onward. And regardless of how the rest of the movie turns out, Hunger Games prequel/sequel Sunrise on the Reaping already gets an A+ for its utterly stupid good casting choices. Where to begin? Ralph Fiennes will play a middle-aged Coriolanus Snow. Jesse Plemons has been cast as Plutarch Heavensbee. Elle Fanning is a young Effie Trinket, and Kieran Culkin takes over from Stanley Tucci as Caesar Flickerman. That's some incredibly inspired casting right there. To say nothing of the new characters to be played by Glenn Close, McKenna Grace, Maya Hawke, Lily Taylor, and many more. It's often said that 90% of directing is casting, in which case director Francis Lawrence hit an absolute home run before he even shot a single frame of the film, and here's hoping the rest of the movie lives up to it. A theatrical-only release, Five Nights at Freddy's 2. It wasn't remotely surprising that the big screen adaptation of hit horror video game franchise Five Nights at Freddy's was a stonking commercial success. But it was surprising just how well it did despite releasing on streaming the very same day in the US. Even with a simultaneous streaming bow, the film scared up an astonishing $297.1 million against a mere $20 million budget, ensuring that Blumhouse swiftly greenlit a sequel. Many box office analysts came away from the first film feeling that Universal and Blumhouse left an enormous amount of money on the table with the day and date release model. And they're not going to make the same mistake again, as Five Nights at Freddy's 2 will be a theatrical exclusive release. It remains to be seen if the sequel will outgross its predecessor or whether casual viewers had their fill the first time. But given that buying a cinema ticket will be the only way to see it day one, it's clearly going to be an explosive hit either way. Getting David Fincher to direct The Adventures of Cliff Booth. When it was announced that a sequel to Once Upon a Time in Hollywood was in the works, and that Quentin Tarantino would be returning as writer but not director, the list of filmmakers who could have conceivably replaced him was surely incredibly short. And Netflix swiftly announced that The Adventures of Cliff Booth would be directed by none other than the great David Fincher. While Fincher's filmmaking style differs considerably from Tarantino's, it doesn't take much imagination to picture him doing wonders with a Tarantino script. And of course, Fincher has worked with star Brad Pitt 3 times previously. Really, the only other director who would feel right to direct Tarantino's dialogue is Paul Thomas Anderson, but given that he doesn't seem to have much interest in either franchises or making movies for streaming services, Fincher was clearly the right and only choice. Though it's disappointing that Tarantino isn't directing the follow-up himself, it's tough to feel too put out when he's secured one of the world's greatest living filmmakers to replace him, making Lin Shaye the lead in Insidious 6. Even though the most recent Insidious film, Insidious: The Red Door, was the highest grossing in the franchise, the general critical and fan response was wildly mixed, with many missing the presence of Lin Shaye's iconic medium Elise, who is without question the series' fan favourite character. Elise appeared in only a throwaway cameo in The Red Door, though in a classic case of giving the audience what they want, it was recently confirmed that Shaye will be reprising her role as Elise as one of the main characters in the now shooting 6th movie. It speaks to how much audiences love Shaye's performance, that they want Elise in these movies no matter that she died at the end of the first film. But between supernatural hooey and the endless possibility of prequels, there's always a way to get her back in the fray. No matter how it happens, having the now 82-year-old Shaye leading the charge once again will be a sight for sore eyes. Telling an original story, Resident Evil. The Resident Evil video game franchise sure has been put through the ringer where live-action adaptations are concerned. Paul W.S. Anderson's original 2002 film wasn't particularly faithful to the games, but remains by far the best of the series, while the more source-faithful follow-ups prove the difficulty of translating heightened video game ideas to a different medium. And though 2021's reboot, Resident Evil: Welcome to Raccoon City, was by far the most game-accurate movie to date, effectively smashing the first and second games into one story, its middling execution failed to do much for most fans. There was much excitement then when Barbarian and Weapons director Zach Cregger was announced to be directing a new Resident Evil reboot. Cregger was quick to point out, however, that his film will tell an entirely original story featuring no characters from the games, which left some fans disappointed. But considering Cregger's penchant for fusing gut-wrenching horror with blackly comedic absurdity, he honestly feels like a perfect fit for the B-movie inspired tone of the Resident Evil games. Sure, you're not going to get classic characters like Leon, Chris, Jill, and Claire, but isn't a brand new story that exists within that universe so much more interesting, especially with a world-class horror filmmaker steering the ship? Getting away from Avengers Doomsday, Shrek 5. At the start of the year, it was announced that the long-awaited Shrek 5 had been delayed from July 1st, 2026 to December 23rd of the same year. That was all well and good until a few months later when Disney announced that Avengers Doomsday was being pushed from May 1st to December 18th, meaning that Shrek 5 would be releasing just 5 days after the most anticipated superhero movie in years. Rather than stubbornly stick to their guns, DreamWorks announced a short while later that Shrek 5 was moving out of 2026 to June 30th, 2027, where it will face little in the way of direct box office competition. Now, given that Avengers Doomsday will suck all the oxygen out of the room at the end of the next year, regardless of its quality, getting far, far away from it was definitely a smart call here. Much as Shrek fans will surely resent waiting an extra 6 months to see the new sequel. A little-known director and cast, Evil Dead Burn. 2023's Evil Dead Rise continued the series' impressive winning streak, even though it was something of an anomaly, given that it didn't feature Bruce Campbell's legendary Ash, nor did it continue on from 2013's solid remake of the original film. An entirely standalone story helmed by a relatively unknown filmmaker, Lee Cronin, and featuring a cast you've likely not seen before, Evil Dead Rise proved that the series could succeed without big names or significant creative involvement from Campbell or creator Sam Raimi. And so the upcoming Evil Dead Burn will be basically attempting to repeat that same success by hiring an on-the-rise genre director, Infested filmmaker Sebastian Vanecek, to bring his own unique voice to the IP, while working with a cast of mostly lesser-known performers. If it can retain the same tone as Rise, melding grim horror with flecks of absurdist black comedy, then Evil Dead Burn will show beyond any doubt that the IP can exist as a collection of largely standalone stories from this point on. Having Terrence Stamp shoot his scenes first, Priscilla Queen of the Desert 2. When the great Terrence Stamp passed away back in August, it was simply assumed that he would therefore not be included in the upcoming sequel to 1994's classic comedy, The Adventures of Priscilla, Queen of the Desert. But back in September, returning writer-director Stefan Elliott confirmed that Stamp had actually already pre-shot his scenes as one of the film's 3 protagonists, Bernadette, in the months prior to his death. An 87-year-old Stamp, well aware he wasn't getting any younger, agreed to shoot all of his scenes before the rest of production, with the actor performing his entire role in front of a 9-camera array. This will then allow it to be digitally pasted over a stand-in who will be present for the main shoot. Now, it's certainly a risky strategy to preserve Stamp's role in the film, but absolutely preferable to using a CGI/AI deepfake of the actor, as his pre-shot performance will still be the essence of Bernadette on screen. Considering that Stamp completed his scenes only shortly before he passed away in August, I'd say this was definitely the right call. Now we can only hope that the technical aspects make Stamp's role feel wholly convincing in the final film. Making Cole a supporting character, Mortal Kombat 2. Despite delivering a bevy of grisly R-rated action, 2021's Mortal Kombat Reboot was widely criticised for centering its story around an entirely original character not featured in the video games, Cole Young. Though Lewis Tan worked with what little he had, most questioned why source material with such a deep roster of iconic characters needed to throw a bland audience surrogate into the mix, and one who came saddled with a wife and daughter for some reason. Thankfully, the early indication is that the filmmakers have listened to the vocal feedback, as the marketing for Mortal Kombat 2 suggests that the protagonist this time around will be video game fan fave Johnny Cage. In fact, Cole has barely been featured in the sequel's trailers at all, leading some fans to theorize that he might be getting killed off early, in much the same way that Cage himself was in the original 1997 sequel, Mortal Kombat Annihilation. But even if Cole lives, it's clear that he's going to be taking a back seat this time around. And finally, putting the title in quotation marks, Wuthering Heights. Saltburn director Emerald Fennell's new adaptation of Emily Bronte's classic novel Wuthering Heights faced a tidal wave of controversy from the moment its 2 lead cast members were announced. Many bristled against the fact that a 34-year-old Margot Robbie will be playing Catherine Earnshaw, who is in her late teens in the end of the story, while a 27-year-old Jacob Elordi portrays Heathcliff, who is said to be around 40 years of age and of ambiguous ethnicity in the novel. Fennell is clearly taking some bold creative liberties with the source material then, a fact clarified by the film's recent first trailer, which also made the curious choice to include its title within quotation marks. This is basically a cute visual shorthand for Fennell to instantly tell anyone who stumbles across the trailer or poster that this is an intentionally loose, radical take on Bronte's text, rather than an ultra-faithful adaptation. Again, setting the right audience expectations is always important, and this is a sly way to do it without talking incessantly about how far it strays from the source material.